This is the On All Cylinders podcast,
presented by Summit Racing.
Your hosts for today are Summit Racing's Al Noe and Brian Nutter, with special guest, drag racing and automotive icon, Big Daddy Don Garlits.
Here we go.
Today we are joined by a truly amazing racer and a true American success story. He perfected the rear-engine top-fuel dragster, has been a huge proponent of safety improvements in drag racing, and was the first drag racer to officially surpass 170, 180, 200, 240, and 270 miles per hour in the quarter mile. He won 10 American Hot Rod Association championships, 4 IHRA championships, and 3 NHRA championships, a total of 17. And he won a total of 144 national events. Today we have the pleasure of speaking with the one and only Big Daddy Don Garlits. Don, thank you so much for joining us today. It is truly an honor for Brian and I to be here with you today, and I just can't thank you enough. How are you doing, and how are things in Florida today?
Well, it's a beautiful, balmy day down here, and I'm doing just fine.
Brian and I are super excited to talk to you today, and before we get into the questions, we'll get into those a little bit later, but we want to talk about your history. Your history is absolutely amazing, and I'd like to specifically have you talk about what was the moment or the time when you were a young man and you said, I want to go drag racing. I'm going to go do that. And you started to build that first car. Could you talk about that in that moment when it all happened and you just said, I am absolutely going to go do that?
Well, there wasn't any drag racing around here. Now, they were drag racing in California, but I didn't know much about that. But a friend of mine had a round track car, and I was a body and paint man. So we got it all lettered up and went out to the track. And he won one of the early races, one of the heats. So he got in one of the final heats that was going to put him into the big race, and one of the old guys just bumped him right over the wall and smashed it all up. And, of course, we were raced then for the rest of the night. And he's over there with a ball-peen hammer beating out the body and everything. I thought to myself, this isn't what I want to do. And so a few of my friends felt the same way, so we went up to Zephyr Hills, Florida, and got them to let us use the old abandoned Army Air Force training field, and that was our first drags at Zephyr Hills. There was about 18 of us, no clocks, everybody raced everybody, no class, and we had the time of our lives, and I knew I wanted to drag race.
That's phenomenal. So really our entire speed industry was opening up at that time, and parts weren't as easily available as they are today. So you were building a lot of your own stuff, had to work with your own fabrication skills, which evolved, and, working with friends that had ideas for, building chassis and things. Can you tell us about the earlier days? Nobody made what you needed. You just had to make it yourself and try it and improve on it?
Well, yeah, the original Swamp Rat that broke the 170 mile an hour record was out of a 31 Chevy. You took all the cross members out, you took it all apart, and you put your own cross members in. We mounted a Ford rear end in it and hooked a Chrysler Hemi engine to it, a 1954 Chrysler Hemi. And we went to the drags, and this was a winner right to start off with because that Chrysler engine was so powerful.
And something I want to remark to all of the viewers here today, when they look at that machine, and the thought of what you made it out of, and the fact that a lot of cars back in that time, were, hard pressed to do 100, 105, 110, and you're doing 170 miles an hour with something home built, very small, not a lot of safety gear available at that time, other than what, the airplane pilots had, of course, with the helmets and things. That's pretty amazing to strap into that thing and just let the thing go.
Yeah, we had a seat belt out of a B-17, and what we called a skid lid was the helmet. It wasn't much of a protection. We drove those cars in T-shirts and regular pants. Never thought about any fire or anything like that.
So really, a lot of the safety industry was actually born out of Florida. I can think of, some of the bigger companies there, just because I guess you were doing it and needed stuff for it.
Don, next on our list today is talking about your favorite race cars and your favorite innovations. Out of all the cars you've had, and there have been so many of them, are there any one or two or three that stick out and you say, that car was awesome, it was just the best car ever?
Well, yeah, Swamp Rat 1 always is my number one favorite. The fuel delivery system, that volume of nitromethane into the engine that most of the guys didn't have. And that's how I was able to go 176 and then 180. Swapret 22 was really a fancy car. That's a car over 250 miles an hour, 5.63 seconds. Of course, 26 was in the museum, was built in 1980. We brought it out and refurbished it in 1984, won the World Finals, and we built Swapret 30, which is in the Smithsonian. And then, of course, Swapret 34, that was 323 miles an hour in 4.73 seconds. Most exciting ride of my life. Innovations, the big fuel up on Swapret 26 with the 3 port nozzles. Everybody thought I was nuts. I could tell right away that was a good innovation, the volume, trying to get more volume into the engine.
Yeah, I mean, in the early times of nitromethane, I guess you guys were mixing, relatively small percentages, 15, 20, and 30. And then I guess you guys just went whole hog with it. Can you tell me about that transition of experimenting with nitromethane to having it become the primary fuel?
Well, we always went about 25% in the flatheads, and then we were afraid that you couldn't run much more than that because of the heat. Cook and Bedwell were running 98%. Now, this is unblown engines. So we went to Cordova, and I just went right over to him, and I said, I can only get 25% nitro in my Hemi. And I understand that you get 98%. How do you do that? In one sentence, he rattled off all of the needle valves, jets, how much pressure, and it was just one sentence. And, of course, it was just like, it went into my mind as like a steel trap, I said, we got a lot of work to do. We got to get out of here. Took the 6 carburetors apart and modified them and outran him in the first round. They said, in all fairness to the world champion, we'll have to see that run again. And it outran him again. And that was my big start in professional racing. I knew that you could beat the California cars because one of my friends here says, oh, you'll never be able to beat the Californians. And then I went up to Cordova and beat their best. It just gave me such an incentive, and of course I was learning as I went along, and I came back here and actually improved on the fuel system that he had and was able to break his record. He'd won 168 and we raised it to 176.
So when people on the West Coast were running or you were running, news didn't fly like it does today with the internet and live streaming and videos right there. What was it like back then trying to figure out who was doing what and where you were stacked up with everybody else?
Believe it or not, the whole deal hinged on drag news. And I'll tell you, we couldn't get our hands on it fast enough. They did a wonderful service back in those days covering all the drag racing.
So, Don, let's talk about competitors. Do you have any competitors that you think of your nemesis and you think, man, that was the greatest race ever when I got the opportunity to beat them?
Shirley Muldowney, Don Perdome were the fierce ones. Now, the one that I raced a lot was Tommy Idle, but that was a match race special because he was such a showman. We didn't make record runs because neither one of us was trying to win so much as we were trying to put on a good show for the people. But the Greek was a tough competitor, very, very tough, and he was the longest one. I mean, he just quit racing like a year ago.
So you want to talk about tire technology? I mean, the tires you guys started off with and really when people started building more dedicated rubber, what years would you say that was? Well,
the first record was set on Bruce Slicks, and they were the tire to have on your car in those days. And a friend of mine used M&H tires on his round track car. When I went to 176, he came out to the shop and looked at those recaps, and he says, Don, you could throw a cap off here, it would kill you. He said, you need to try a set of these cruisers for round track cars. And I went up to Chester, South Carolina, and it just so happened that Marvin and Harry Rifkin, Harry was the dad, that's why it's M&H, were just thinking about maybe getting into drag racing. And here I showed up and then had low ET of the meet on a set of their cruisers that were made for round track cars.
Boy, that's amazing. And thinking that you went that fast on that little of a tire, today there's, big tire racing, small tire racing, drag radial race and all kinds of stuff. But back then, that took a lot of guts and a lot of stones, Don. I mean, that is something else. That is flying.
Yeah.
That was the famous 2 black marks right through the lights. When you'd done that, you had a good run.
So that was something else that I was, kind of curious about. as the cars go faster, you're probably, trading weight for stability. And there were ratios of car like a slingshot would be like 6-to-1 or something like that. And then the car started growing in length. Can you tell us a little bit how you kind of figured out how long the car had to be to keep settled down?
We figured out early on that the wheelbase was important. The further the front wheels were away from the rear wheels, the more percentage of the car was on the rear wheels. And then front wheels wanted to lift. It didn't take near as much weight on those to hold it down. So a little bit of weight on the front was all you needed, that you had that leverage. So that's why they'd be even longer if it wasn't for the NHRA said, that's it, we don't want them any longer. If they were longer, they'd actually be faster than they are today.
Well, you kind of point out something there that, there are so many parts to build a race car. We've talked a little bit about the nitro, and we've talked a little bit about the rubber and all that. But you were big into aero as well. I mean, you had a lot of very advanced concepts. I mean, there's the streamliner. There's also you going out to Bonneville, which is a whole other thing. But, can you tell us about the, aerodynamics when you started thinking about trying to push against the wind and trading a little bit of weight to get some, higher speeds down track?
When I was a Boy Scout, I made several very aerodynamic little streamliners, getting the Aerodynamics merit badge. So I always had that in my mind. And the big streamliner was a little on the heavy side. That was a problem with that. It was just too heavy, and you gave up too much to start with. And then, of course, 34, where we took all that wing, that was very aerodynamic. The nice rudder on the back holding the wing up. That car, that 323 run, picked up 65 miles an hour from the eighth to the end, more gain than any car had made at that point.
Yeah, it's neat to think about, having those advancements and, having the wing on the front of the car to keep the nose down, and probably thinking about how you had that trimmed out. Planes and aerodynamics have never been that disassociated with cars. I mean, even to this day, we still share a lot between those two things. So that's pretty cool.
Well, the first wing on the rear engine car, we ran that car for 3 or 4 events before we had a wing on the back of it. And I went up and did a match race in Shuffletown with Ivo, and he outran me 3 straight. So we came back to Tampa, and we put a wing on the back, and the car picked up a full quarter of a second and 10 miles an hour. Plus, the car was much easier to drive. When we did that, there wasn't anything the slingshots could do to keep up. The disadvantage of the slingshot at that time was the driver was sitting in back of the rear tires, which he didn't need to be because the tires were nice and big and fat. And so we have the driver sitting in back of the rear tires, and then we have to put lead on the front to hold the front down. And you didn't have to do that with a rear engine car. You didn't need all the lead. The driver moved up front. He had better vision, better control of the car. And the car got a couple 100 pounds lighter. I mean, you can't beat a combination like that.
So win. And then, it wasn't just Hemis either. You're sticking helicopter turbine engines into things. I mean, you weren't shy. And we're going to get into the other thing that you started doing in the 2017-18 timeframe with another power plant. But, tell us about when you were, messing around with the turbines.
Well, I was good friends with Craig Arfons, and he always thought the engine would be superior. And the AHRA would allow us to use that turbine in top fuel. So we went to work on that, and the engines were about 2,200 horsepower with the alcohol water injector. But I don't think we ever got up to that kind of speed because it just didn't perform like wanted it to. And he worked with us quite a bit on the engine. I couldn't do anything with the engine. I didn't know that much about them. And so after a while, it didn't make any noise. That was another problem, that it was too quiet. And we never did really get the power that we were supposed to get.
Interesting. Don, out of all the events and tracks that you've been at, what's the favorite event that you've had that you've won? And also, are there racetracks that are top of the list for you, the places that you love to go, the places you love to race? Can you talk about some of the places you've been and not just in the U.S., because we know you've been really all over the world throughout your career?
Well, my favorite racetrack is Gainesville because it's got so much shut-off. You can actually not have a parachute open and you'd be fine there. But then Indianapolis, that's a special place. And, if you ask anybody if they had to pick one race a year that they would like to win, it would always be Indy. That'll never change. It doesn't have the shutoff that Gainesville's got, but it is a nice track, and I really love it.
We hope you're enjoying the On All Cylinders podcast presented by Summit Racing. We'll get back to the interview in just 60 seconds. But after the show's over, check out summitracing.com. Whether you're restoring a vintage classic, building a tire shredding hot rod, outfitting a rough and tough off-roader, or just keeping your daily driver running strong, you'll find the parts and tools you need to get it done at summitracing.com. Wheels, tires, paint and body, brakes, exhaust, engine parts. Summitracing.com has everything you need for anything you drive. All backed by blazing fast shipping and the best customer service in the industry. And ordering couldn't be easier, either via phone, online, or the Summit Racing mobile app. Need help with your project? Call Summit Racing's tech support team, and they'll be able to answer questions and recommend the right parts for your ride. That's summitracing.com. Now, back to the On All Cylinders podcast.
Don, let's talk. You mentioned earlier about the turbine engine car, and it reminded me about something that you've been involved with when you said that the crowd at match races didn't like it because it didn't make noise. And that would be the EV dragster project that you've worked on. At Summit, we've actually begun to do some investigating and researching into the EV car market because we see it growing and we think it's going to be growing for sure. And your history with it and the dragster. Can you talk a little bit about that project, and if you foresee doing anything more with that in the future?
They are here, and they're going to stay here. Thing about it is, an internal combustion engine is real clean when it's brand new, and then as it wears, it gets a little more pollution, but it's just still running real good. But the cities will be first to be all electric. There will be more and more electric cars, and I got into it kind of as a quirk because Daryl Gwynn and I did some match races with basically just glorified golf carts that looked like dragsters. They only went 30 miles an hour. But I always wondered just how fast you could actually go. So I said, how fast do you think we could go if we took the gloves off? He said he thought we could go 200 miles an hour. So that excited me because here was something I could get into, make changes, and I didn't have to stick to such strict rules. But right. I did build Swamp Rat 37 that held the record at 185.6, 7.25 seconds. Then the coronavirus hit, and we had all kinds of trouble. We just quit kind of working on it. The battery technology changing. And I would really like to have the new batteries for Swamp Rat 38, but I don't know how soon that new technology will be available for just anybody. It's really tricky, the charging. It's a whole new world out there, this electric vehicle.
Yeah, I mean, we agree with you. It's like, when you went with the turbine engine, for instance, or the first time you stuck, that load of nitro in the thing, you have to learn a lot about, you're a guy that likes to learn. You like to do things through learning. And that's something that a lot of people may never get. But when they ask you why you're going electric, it's like, it's new. It's something I haven't done before. It's fascinating, so if people wonder why sometimes, just because, it's like I wanted to learn about something else, figure out what makes the motor do what it does, the motor controllers, the battery. And so that's all the excuse a guy like you needs to go out there and try different things.
Well, there's a little trivia here that you probably don't know. My father was on the team that invented the electric iron and the electric fan.
Huh. So you got a long history with electric variety of things, right, Don? So this is just natural.
Yeah, he's up there just smiling about all this stuff. If the light bulb wasn't burning, he screwed the light bulb out of the socket, put his finger, wet the end of his finger, and stuck it up in the socket to see if there was electricity up there.
All right. So here's another question. You've been out to Bonneville. And you had to be looking at, those guys out there on the salt and, the streamliners where, it's all about frontal area and stuff. And I knew that you love that stuff. So you built your car to go, you build a car to go do that. You didn't buy a car. You didn't whatever. I mean, you build a car to go do that. Can you tell us, what made you decide to go do Bonneville at a certain point?
I got in touch with a couple of people that Bill Smith, he paid a lot of the money to help me with it to come out there. He was a dear friend of mine, and it was a big team. There was a lot of guys involved in that. and it was went over 217 miles an hour. And it was a real thrill to drive down that Bonneville track. The one run, I didn't even want to shut off. I just kept driving. It was going faster, And there was plenty of room. And they fussed at me about that.
So what is that like, because, we worship these engines, the flathead and the heavy and all that stuff. And you were there for the first go around of these engines. And, it's kind of funny to think about you still going out there and building something. I don't know how much the technology, I'm not a flathead specialist, but what is it like building those engines that you've been around all your life and they're still here?
I have a whole lot of them in my shop that run. In fact, I just run a bunch of them this morning. I have all that kind of stuff there on run stands, and I take my friends back there and sometimes on private tours.
So we have a question from Mopar Man. He said, a question for Don. What was it like racing the Surfers crew back in the day?
I only ever raced the Surfers once. They were a really nice group of kids. They were youngsters, and they just ran 100% nitro all the time. They made some awesome runs, and they're almost like urban lore, the stories about them. They're of legends.
That's
fill
really cool.
the tank up and send it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Don, let's talk about your museum. So a real quick story, and I don't know if you remember this, but years ago, I worked for a company called Stainless Works. And one day, our phone sales guy was really busy, and the phones were ringing like crazy. So I grabbed the phone, and the fellow on the other end of the line says, "Hey, do you make weld-up header kits for Hemis?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure we can help you with that." And he said, "Okay, do you have them for $392? Do you have all the pipes?" And I said, Yeah, we could sell you a Zumi kit." And he said, "Well, I'm working on a project at this museum, and can you get them shipped out today?" And I said, "Yeah, I think we can get all that done for you." And I said, "Where are we shipping it to?" And he said, "Well, my name's Don Garlits, and it's to my museum." And I said, "Wait a minute, the Don Garlits?"
Right.
And you just very matter-of-factly and humbly said, yeah, that's me." And I said, "Oh, my gosh." And I was just blown away because ever since I was a kid, Don, I watched you racing, and it was the coolest thing. At that time, you said, "Hey, if you guys are down here for the PRI show, come on by the museum, and we'll show you around. We'll show you everything." So Scott Harrison, my salesperson at the time, he and I went to PRI, and then we went to the museum. And if anybody is ever in that area, and it's been a while ago, I need to get down there at some point because I'm sure it's changed a lot. Yeah, road trip. Let's go. But we go down there, and we walked around the museum. You showed us around. You treated us like family. And the place was amazing. If somebody even thinks they kind of, sort of might like drag racing, go to the museum because you'll leave liking drag racing because there is so much stuff there and so much history. It is a phenomenal place. Can you tell us about the history of the museum, how you started it? How'd you do this? It's just amazing.
Well, I tell you, I had a lot of help from my friends and the man upstairs. There's cars that we retrieved that were on their way to the scrap pile, and we found out about it and got it stopped. My wife and I traveling in England in 1976, visiting the English Car Museum. We were so impressed with how they'd saved everything. I said, "God, we ought to have a drag racing museum." And so my wife and I came back to Florida and we built one. We had it for 6 years in Seffner and had no visitors. One day she says, "What are we going to do with this when you don't race anymore and can't support it?" We thought it was going to be something was going to be supporting us. Instead of that, we're supporting it. We moved it to Ocala, to this location where it's at now. I've been here for 36 years, and it does well. We always have a lot of visitors every year, and we built more buildings, and we are a nonprofit, so that's good.
I'm looking at the pictures right now, and they're just absolutely gorgeous, the machinery in there. Just amazing.
I enjoy going in there myself. That's where all the drag racing started for me, those early Fords, and we got all of them. We got almost every one of the early Fords, and some of those cars have really stories behind them. Low mileage cars. I got a 49 Ford in there with 6,000 original miles.
And you've got one of those that does 135 miles an hour. Which one is that one?
That'd have to be the one, my 39 with the Hemi engine in it.
That's the one. I mean, this thing's like, I can't even believe it, because that's flying,
Yeah, if you're brave enough to drive it that fast. Now, see, when I was young, it didn't make any difference. I didn't care. Now I realize something could happen to a tire or something.
Yeah, and that's not such a lightweight engine in that car either. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, well, Don, that's a great place, and thank you for being the steward of that. And again, if anybody's ever in Florida, you've got to make a trip to the Don Garlits Museum. It is just a magical place. So much cool automotive history and memorabilia. Again, you will love it, and I can promise you that. So go there and visit, buy some parts from Summit, and you'll have a good day. I do want to get on, Don, to the questions, because we asked customers for some questions, and we asked our employees for some questions too. So we've got some really good ones. So Jerry Smith asks, what's going to be your next chapter in your life? Is there any more racing of any kind? And he mentions one of his biggest thrills was racing at E-Town the night you raced Shirley for the last time there. So everybody's got great memories of seeing you race and the things you did. Do you think are you planning to do much more racing, or are you gonna what's on the plan?
Well, I plan to continue this electric car program, and there is some plans in the works, maybe building an electric car that would have to reach 250 miles an hour. That's in the back of my head. So that's the plan for the future. And that Englishtown race, I remember it well. I won that race.
That is really awesome. Another customer, Danny Grissom, asks, are there any plans for the Smithsonian to bring out Swamp Wrap 30 for display anytime soon? How about that? I've been to the Smithsonian, but I don't recall seeing it. I'm not sure if they rotate. I know they do that because they have so much content and so many things out there. Have you heard anything about that, Don, or can you give us any update on that?
Yeah, I can tell you all about that. Well, they were supposed to be opening the Smithsonian Motorsports Museum, but it got put in the back shelf for a couple of reasons. There were some things they wanted to do, show more stuff about the black community and some of their contributions to society. And so that got put ahead of this museum. We think that it's going to open in 2022, and it will be a complete motorsports museum. Swamp Rat 30 will be on permanent display there.
That is fantastic. Glad to hear that, Don. That is awesome. Sherry Swisher asked a question, Don, about what speed innovation that you came up with that made the greatest performance gain. What would be that one thing when you look back on all the different things you've tried and tested over the years? What's the biggest thing? You mentioned aero earlier, and maybe that is it. But
or the fuel, and
the injectors. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the fuel always is, the volume of the fuel. But I'll always remember weighing on Swamp Rat 14 and just going right up 10 miles an hour and of course it got faster as we learned how to use that wing. Everything just worked perfect. And it also gave the car a nice look. I'd always say that wing was a great innovation.
So one other question, Don. Pee Wee Miller asked, is it true the engine blew up in Swamp Rat 1 or one of the early cars? You pulled the engine out of your tow vehicle, put it in the dragster, and it either went faster or you won the race, one of the two.
It wasn't a tow vehicle. It was one of our support cars. My wife and I had a 392 Imperial Coupe, and we blew the engine at one of the tracks. And so we went to the garage, pulled the engine, and this is when we ran just a stock block with stock bore. What it done had cracked a main and put the new assembly into the Imperial engine and went back and won the race. And then, of course, we had to get an engine for the Imperial to get home.
That's awesome.
That is so cool. Don, Bob Arnold asks a question. After a life of racing and all kinds of different engineering, motorsports, auto sports developments, are there any regrets that you have? Anything you can look back on?
Well, there's a lot of things you look back on. You're like, I'd be afraid to go back and change anything like that because, look at the change that it made in the sport and the lives that it saved. You can't mess with anything like that, but you can't do much about it. It's just life.
Well, the safety improvements, Don, the innovations that you made as a result of that's definitely that case of making lemonade out of lemons for sure. I mean, it's just awesome that
thank you.
The approach you took to that, and you figured out, hey, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to make it better. And we're all appreciative for that for sure. So
the fire brought all the fire suits and all the gloves and all the good fire equipment. It was great,
Well, we're going to have to meet up soon. I'm definitely really wanting to head down to the track here pretty quick. It's a good time of the year for it right now, too.
Don, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. You're a fantastic guest. You're a great ambassador of the sport, just a great American success story. And it's an honor and a privilege for us to talk to you today. Brian and I cannot thank you enough.
Well, I'm so happy to see that you're getting into some of the electric car stuff, because that's something of the future for sure. There's no way we can change it. And this is the time to get involved while it's all young and on the ground floor.
We'll have to talk about that after the show.
Yeah, we will do that, Don, for sure. We'll talk more with you about that, because it's been an interesting adventure so far, and we've got some interesting stuff we're working on. So we'll talk with you about that. Thank you so much, Don. Awesome. Have a great day.
Hey, had a great time, guys. Thank you.
Summit customers, again, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Everybody. Go out and enjoy your cars.
This has been the On All Cylinders podcast,
presented by Summit Racing.
Check out new episodes coming soon at OnAllCylinders.com.
OnAllCylinders.com.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.